This is Bristol Foster, a biologist who spent 4.5 years at the university in Nairobi teaching wildlife ecology. His experience as a cinematographer has taken him around the world, filming natural history. Join Dr. Bristol Foster on the Audubon Wildlife Theater, featuring the adventures of the greatest outdoor photographers in the world.
Four times the size of the United States, Africa is the most varied, mysterious, exciting, and least known region on Earth. Research on big game is a new experience in Africa, and we have much to learn about the most spectacular wildlife in the world. After many millions of years, the plants, animals, including people, have evolved a very delicate balance among themselves and their environment. Birth and death rates are crucial factors in maintaining this balance. The warthog, for example, has 3 to 5 babies a year, but most die during their first year. In this way, the population remains constant. The high birth rate of the warthog is balanced, generally through predation, by its high death rate. But now game is confined and compressed in reserves and national parks, where hunting is prohibited. Research and management have become necessary to maintain a natural balance. To manage animals like the jackal and the wildebeest, or any other species responsibly, we must first study their habits and determine accurately their movements and longevity. To do this, we must be able to recognize individuals. Some individuals can be recognized by their own marking. Here's a distinctive pale zebra, which is partly albino, and so we don't have to mark it. Many are tagged or marked in some way by the researcher. Walter Leithold, a scientist from Switzerland, is studying the behavior of Uganda kob, which look a bit like deer, but they wear horns, not antlers. By using tranquilizing darts, we can catch a large mammal without hurting it. It's put to sleep so the scientist can mark it and recognize it later. When tagging is expertly done, there is generally no pain. It's more of a reflex action on the part of the animal. Hans Krug from Oxford is studying the hyena, not the best-natured of animals, even when they're being darted and drugged. He puts a steel collar on its neck and cuts nicks in the ears. With this coding system, Hans was able to recognize many of the 500 hyenas living in the Ngorongoro crater. Dick Estes from the United States is sneaking up on a baby Thompson gazelle and he can catch it without tranquilizing. With a tag in its ear, we can trace its movements, growth rate, and relationships with other gazelle. Most cats are night prowlers, but cheetah are most active during the day, which makes them easy to study. One of my graduate students was studying cheetah. He didn't have to mark them. He could recognize the adults by their spotting. He could study how often these cheetah made their kills, and what species and age class of animal they killed. It's amazing how little is known about African animals. You can study some species for a few months and know more about them than anyone else in the world. In the rocky bluffs near Nairobi, we find the hyrax. These are rock hyrax. There is also a tree hyrax which lives in forest country. John Sale has trapped this hyrax and puts a tag in its ear. Again, the basic problem of recognizing individuals. John found out that they keep together and live much like a herd of hoofed animals. Their unusual feet, in bone structure, are basically the same as their closest relative, the elephant. About 30 million years ago, the hyrax used to be much bigger and the elephant much smaller. This is our pet rock hyrax, Charlie. They're very easy to look after, and they soon become fascinating and delightful pets. It's tea time for my mother and my wife Anna. As far as Charlie is concerned, it's tea time for him too, but he settles for a share of Anna's apple. One of the most remote parts of the world is Central Island and Lake Rudolph. Crocodiles have been hunted mercilessly throughout most of the continent, and there are very few areas such as this where you can see many today. One of my graduate students was out on Central Island. Moji Moda is an Asian and a very keen biologist. At one end of his island is a beach where the crocodiles have their favorite nesting area. Moji has a little hut to keep off the scorching sun and where he can study the nesting activity. Some young crocs can be found under large rocks. Preferably, you find them and not they you. It's amazing how fast they can be. Many of the eggs have already hatched. We could actually hear them chirping when they were ready to hatch. The shell is not hard, like a chicken egg. It's soft and leathery, like a turtle's egg. Although there are usually 30 to 60 eggs in a nest, Most of the newborn are killed by their many enemies within a few months. Once again, the very high birth rate is balanced by a very high death rate. This helps to ensure the future of the species and of the environment. Like other scientists, Mulgy had the problem of recognizing individuals, so he dabbed a bit of paint on the top of each head. By using different color codes, he was able to follow babies from individual nests. A new system of marking an animal is to put a radio transmitter on it. Ernest Abels from Texas was the first to use this method in Kenya. The point is that even if you have an individual you can recognize, like this young impala, you may not be able to find it. After marking an animal, we always protect it from its predators until the effects of the drug wear off. Two large radio receivers with directional antenna could pick up the radio signal, and by spacing the two receivers about a mile apart, they could triangulate and know exactly where the animal was. Each animal had a different beep, and Ernest could keep track of their movements day and night. This valuable information just can't be gathered in any other way. My own project was on giraffe in Nairobi National Park, an area about 100 miles south of the equator. I chose giraffe for study because no two are alike. Each giraffe's neck pattern is different, just like our fingerprints. Instead of having to mark the animals, I simply photograph their neck patterns. The birth rate of the giraffe is relatively low, but so is the death rate, and as a result, giraffe are also in delicate balance with their environment. Nairobi Park is 44 square miles of wilderness. Right at the edge of the park is the city of Nairobi, and within 10 minutes I could drive from the middle of the city to the park. Here the giraffe ate mostly whistling thorn acacia, which is very nutritious. But when I learned more about this bush, I wondered how on earth they could eat it. Besides being covered with very sharp thorns, it is also covered with stinging ants. The whistling thorn bush is a remarkable community, supplying both food and lodging for the ants, which, in turn, help to discourage the heavy browsing. Instead of the giraffe eating heavily on one bush, it will move from bush to bush. There are many galls on the bush, and inside each gall is a nest with the ant larvae and eggs. The nest has one or more exits. Knowing these ants are stinging, Anna was quite a hero this day. Suddenly she realized that she's being bitten. Often they take a few minutes before they attack, and then you know it. A great advantage for a 17-foot giraffe is his ability to reach higher for food than anyone else. But his great height makes it awkward for him to reach the ground. When their head is low, as when they're drinking, feeding on a low bush, or licking salt, giraffe are more vulnerable to lions, the only predator capable of killing an adult. Mind you, those huge hooves have been known to kill a lion with a single kick. We are now flying over Uganda, along the Victoria Nile in Murchison Falls National Park. All that bare soil and the signs of the heavy erosion and lack of trees are the result of too many hippos and elephants in East Africa's national parks. 100 years ago, the African hunters were part of the balanced ecology and helped keep the hippo and elephant in check. But recently, their hunting has been outlawed. With the African hunters gone, the death rate of elephant and hippo has declined, and their populations have increased so much they are destroying their own environment. In their search for food, they knock trees down to get at their leaves and bark. The elephants thin out the forest, and this lets in more sunlight, and as a result, more grass grows. During the dry season, big fires break out, sweeping through the dead wood and destroying many of the live trees. Within a few years, there is not much left but grassland, and many browsing animals like the giraffe are eliminated. In the meantime, the hippos have taken over the grasslands near their water holes in sufficient numbers to finally turn a forest into eroded floodplain. The solution began in Uganda about 1957, when research scientists began cropping hippos, and it turned out to be a boon for all concerned, except, of course, the hippo that was shot. Scientists learned a great deal about hippos, and the Africans got a lot of good quality protein. Most important, the environment began to recover. Cropping elephants in Uganda parks began in 1963 and has been a mammoth problem compared with hippos. They're a much bigger animal, generally living in roadless and waterless country. Our main concern was that death would be quick and that the elephant would be completely utilized by the local Africans. Wind is tested by shaking a bag full of ashes. Elephants are almost blind, so they are quite easy to approach, moving very slowly upwind to within about 15 or 20 yards. At that range, we can kill the elephant instantly. The herd has naturally heard the shot, but they smell nothing, they see nothing, so they're not overly concerned. Now the problem is to get the meat to the people quickly. The biologist gathers pathological information and takes measurements which will establish the age of the animal. It's sad to see these majestic animals killed, but the species is better off in the long run. now south of Nairobi Park on a very different project. We're trying to save a rare species, the black rhinoceros, which is in danger outside of the park. We'll have to dart it and move it into a park where it will be safe. While our plane flies ahead to spot the rhino for us, we carefully measure out the drugs. These are so powerful that 1.5 milligrams will put the rhino to sleep. The plane has found a rhino about 1 mile ahead, so we cock our crossbow and set off. The chase begins with a wild dash through the whistling thorns. We finally get close enough to hit the rhino in the rump. Within a few minutes, it's a bit drugged and staggering. We try to get a lasso over its head without success. It's still a dangerous animal, so we have to be very careful. After one of the Africans gets a rope around the leg, everybody is courageous. They come out and try to pull the animal over. From the moment it's down, every care is taken to look after the rhinoceros to make sure she's not hurt. A rubber tire is placed under its head so she won't bang it on the ground. Oxygen is administered into the nostril. The veterinarian, Dr. John King, measures the pulse. Now, where would you measure the pulse on a rhino? At the base of the tail, of course. After a few weeks in captivity, we release the rhino into the park. In the past few years, our research has revealed the beautifully precise adaptations most living things have made to their environment. Under natural conditions, a remarkable balance is maintained. Above all, research in East Africa has shown that in a healthy environment, the death rate balances the birth rate. But when the death rates are lowered, as with the hippo and elephant, the population increases to a point where it destroys the environment. Herein lies the lesson for us. The world population of man is doubling every 35 years. Research on wild animals shows clearly that either we lower our birth rate or else the death rate will eventually rise. The choice is ours.
Have you ever seen giraffes necking? Or seen a 1-minute-old wildebeest? Or do you know what this vulture is doing? You'll see these and many more exciting scenes with Bristol Foster on the Audubon Wildlife Theater, featuring the adventures of the greatest outdoor photographers in the world.
Porpoises have led us across the blue waters of the Mediterranean to the sands of Egypt. The camel, its large feet supporting it on the sand, is as well adapted to the desert as the porpoise is to the sea. Unfortunately, man is not well adapted to either. The pyramids near Cairo were built over 4,000 years ago and are one of the many examples of a civilization which did not adapt. At dawn, my wife and myself climbed Cheops Pyramid before beginning our journey down south, up the Nile, to teach wildlife ecology at the university in Kenya. We found the hieroglyphs of a special interest, since they show that animals were important to the way of life in ancient Egypt. Yet, in spite of their interest in nature, the Egyptians eventually killed off most of the animals once native to their country. But they were keen observers. Here a hippo is giving birth, and a crocodile waits to eat the baby. Not far upriver from Cairo, the desert starts pressing in. Vegetation thins, and about the only wildlife is the red-headed hoopoe and the occasional kite, soaring gracefully overhead. As we continue south, the daytime heat of the desert becomes intense and oppressive. Among the wonders of this shimmeringly hot desert country are the mirages. Camels seem to be walking through a lake, but there is no water for at least 100 miles. It only rains here once every few years, but when it does, life gets hard for the animals used to living in complete dryness. This gerbil got rained out of his burrow. He is already suffering from the blazing sun. He must find a new hole quickly, or he will dehydrate from the heat and die. We have now traveled over 4,000 miles from one of the greatest densities of people in the world at the Nile's mouth to one of the greatest densities of big game in the world around the source of the Nile in East Africa. The variety of vegetation and wildlife in East Africa is remarkable. Here I climb Mount Kenya on the equator, where the temperatures drop below freezing every night and every day is summer. The alkali lakes of Central Africa are famous for their millions of flamingos. The freshwater lakes support quite different life forms. The jacana is well adapted for walking around in such an environment and for grabbing a meal when he can. One of the largest of all storks, the saddlebill, stands about 5 feet tall. A yellow-billed stork searches for food on the lake's muddy bottom. Green and yellow bee-eaters pose like figures in a Japanese print. The chameleon is a lizard of many skills. It can peer in different directions at the same time from its turret-mounted eyes. Though the chameleon delivers its young in eggs, the eggs are so soft and the young are so completely developed, they are ready to fend for themselves within moments of being born. This piggyback position is purely accidental, though it happens to be the safest place the young chameleon could be. If it gets in the way of mother's darting tongue, it may find itself eaten. An entire litter of 26 new chameleons is hardly a handful. The pangolin looks like a reptile, but it is in fact a mammal. It has hair under its scales, bears its young live, and suckles them. The pangolin is an anteater. It darts its sticky long tongue among the ants and their larvae, gathering in tremendous quantities at a time. I kept this animal as a pet for a while, but found it took too much of my time feeding it. So I released the pangolin into the wild. In contrast to the varied habitats and animals are the peoples of East Africa. The Kikuyu tribesmen and their agriculture leave little room for wildlife. In further contrast are the dry and dusty rangelands of the Maasai, the cattle people. They keep their cattle constantly on the move, seeking fresh grazing land and, as the season gets drier, seeking water. Zebras drinking at the precious water hole are soon crowded out when the cattle arrive in their thousands. To keep the rangelands free of trees, to allow fresh green grass to grow, the Maasai light fires that spread for miles. The fires attract storks, who know that hordes of insects will be flying and running from the flames and will be easy prey. Man, fire, and rain. These are the principal factors affecting the environment and its life forms. The dry season can be compared to a northern winter. The rainy season is then like our spring and summer. The hartebeests know that it is a time of abundant food and new life. Every year I took my students to see the vast migration of wildebeest to their calving grounds. In a few weeks, well over 100,000 calves will be born. Since this is open grassland, without cover, the calves must be born quickly and must learn to run within minutes of birth, or they will be eaten by waiting hyenas. Here the baby has its first look at a very hostile world. Mother wildebeest quickly licks away all traces of the birth, so the constantly searching hyenas will find no indication that a highly vulnerable new calf has been born. Coordination is remarkably good, considering the calf is now less than 5 minutes old. It looks as though these zebra, wildebeest, and hartebeest are competing for the same food. Actually, zebra graze on the longer species of grass, wildebeest on the shorter, and warthogs on the shortest grass. An excellent example of different species of animals living in harmony with one another. Largest of the pure grazing animals is the hippopotamus. He's not only a grazer, he's a wallower. He eats all night and keeps cool in the glorious mud all day. Showing little but a valve-like nostril, and sometimes not even that. Like the grazers, the browsers have divided up their food resource to minimize competition. The impala and bushbuck eat the tender shoots of forest trees. Nature puts thorns on bushes presumably to protect them from browsing animals, but the black rhinoceros has evolved a tough mouth to cope with the thorns. The most destructive browser of all is the African elephant. It breaks up the vegetation, leaving dead wood around and allowing fire to come in. Eventually, bush is replaced with grassland, and the browsers are forced to move or become extinct. The long neck of the gerenuk gives it a useful browsing advantage. Since the giraffe can reach as high as 18½ feet, they don't have to compete with the gerenuk, rhino, or any other animal for browse. Sharing the environment with the grazers and browsers are the carnivores, or meat-eaters. Africa's fearsome wild dogs hunt in packs and can bring down prey as large as wildebeest. At feasts like this, the scavengers soon appear. There are 6 kinds of vultures, each specializing in a different part of the carcass. An Egyptian vulture prepares to open an ostrich egg, or to try to open an ostrich egg. The Egyptian vulture is the only species that knows this trick, and evidently not all of them can do it. Everybody wants to get into the act. These 2 big vultures broke the egg with their beaks, but the small Egyptian seems to be saying, "Look, you do it this way, this way." We gave a pair of Egyptian vultures a white balloon to see whether we could fool them. The balloon is twice normal egg size. It fooled them, but not completely. Eventually, the vulture opened a real egg and had his hard-earned meal. It is the wealth of exotic wildlife which attracts tourists to the game parks of East Africa. They come from all over the world to have wild cheetahs sit on their car hoods. Tourism helps bring in foreign currency and makes it one of Kenya's most important industries. A circle of cars means that the tourists have found a large cat. I don't mind watching an opera in the company of thousands of people, but it takes away from my enjoyment of lion watching if I must share the experience with a crowd. That's why I think the game parks of East Africa, and indeed of the world, should be enlarged, not just for the animals, but for the visitors too. Tourists are often surprised that lions, even lionesses with their families of cubs, can be so tame, while ostriches are so fierce. Her attacks on my car were an attempt to protect her nest. Even more unnerving than a charging ostrich is a hulking rhinoceros that suddenly decides to investigate our presence. Rhinos generally attack when confused, and being nearly blind, they are often confused, which adds drama to field trips. Because of the importance to Africa's tourist industry of a wide variety of animals, and also because of the great interest among naturalists in African wildlife, a great deal of research has been initiated in the past 10 years. Scientists from many countries have come to study various species and to help African students understand wildlife ecology. Baboons live in family groups and exhibit strangely human behavior. This female is carrying a baby which has been dead for 3 days. Her maternal attachment is so strong that she continues to defend it from inquisitive visitors. One wonders what could be passing through her mind as she continues to groom the baby as if it were still alive. Here an ecologist, he's the one in the background, is evidently of intense interest to the monkey. The question is, who is studying whom? Biologists often have to mark their animals, such as with ribbons on this cob's ears, in order to be able to recognize them later. One of the reasons I chose giraffe to study was to avoid the need for marking individual animals. The patterns on their necks are the same from the day they are born, and each giraffe has its own unique pattern, much as we have our own unique fingerprints. This photograph, taken 20 years ago, identified this giraffe still alive today. The markings are identical. Giraffes are fleet of foot and quick of eye, which means they are not easy prey for lurking carnivores, except when they spread their long legs wide apart to reach down and lick up the ground salt their bodies require. In this head-down position, they are particularly vulnerable to attack. Anytime a predator is spotted, the giraffe keeps watch with interest. At birth, baby giraffes are 6 feet tall and weigh about 150 pounds. We were anxious to know the migratory habits of giraffe. We start by trying to drug one with a dart gun. We've given her a light dose of drug so she won't fall over and hurt herself. Perhaps the dose is too light for the 2,500-pound animal. She's anything but cooperative. The object of the exercise is to put a radio around the animal's neck. Nobody has ever known whether a giraffe wanders 10 miles or 100 miles in its search for food. Oops, we almost forgot that we had meant to paint her pale pink before turning her loose. Well, better late than never. Next morning, we drive to a high point of land and take a reading with a directional radio antenna. If our pale pink transistorized giraffe is within 6 miles, we'll find her. Using this technique, we followed our subject for several months, discovering that she lived and fed in about 20 square miles in and outside of Nairobi Park. If animals need to range outside the park for food, obviously the area is not a satisfactory ecological unit and should be made bigger. Like rhinos and elephants, giraffes seem able to browse happily on the prickliest of shrubbery, while tick birds forage for food on the giraffe's back. This extraordinary performance is called necking, but there's nothing friendly about it. This is the way male giraffes fight. All this research and teaching in wildlife ecology is a unique experience for Africa. The young African nations of today can learn to live in harmony with nature by using wildlife wisely. Both scientific research and the mistakes of the ancient Egyptians are useful lessons for the world. If we can have the conscience to apply our ecological knowledge to our environment, there is a good chance that we shall not destroy it, and with it, ourselves.
Who spent 4.5 years at the university in Nairobi teaching wildlife ecology. His experience as a cinematographer has taken him around the world, filming natural history. Join Dr. Bristol Foster on the Audubon Wildlife Theater, featuring the adventures of the greatest outdoor photographers in the world.
Africa, an ancient continent. Unlike much of the northern hemisphere which suffered the ravages of the great glaciations, Africa has enjoyed a long period of evolution. This, in turn, has produced a great assortment of plants and animals. This diversity of growth is also due to the many kinds of environment. Here in East Africa, the terrain varies from alpine to coral reef. Mount Kenya and Kilimanjaro lie almost on the equator and provide a most unusual environment for the life forms. Each night is like winter and every day summer. As a result of this isolated and difficult environment, the plants and animals on the tropical African mountains are unique. From the peak of Mount Kilimanjaro, at over 19,000 feet, we plunge to the snowy coral beaches on the Indian Ocean. Again, the special life forms have adapted to a climate that is hot and sultry, with long periods of drought and rain. The giant baobab tree is an example of this exotic life. Contrasting the snows of Kilimanjaro are the vast plains beneath its summit, where evolution has produced one of the greatest densities of large animals in the world. They can exist in such numbers since each species is integrated into the total ecological system. Life in the freshwater lakes occurs in great luxuriance and profusion under the scorching sun. Foraging among the lilies is the knobbed-billed coot. The alkali lakes are a harsher environment. In the shallow areas, salt flats form. But for the blinding heat, one could almost imagine that one was walking on frost. To live here, plant or animal must be highly adapted for conserving water. But life does exist, in the millions. The pink on the shoreline of salty Lake Nakuru is part of the millions of lesser and greater flamingos which live here. In ecological terms, no two species can exist in the same environment by living in exactly the same way. Should this ever occur, one species would be driven to extinction. What then is the difference in behavior between these two species which allows them to live together? Studies have shown that these greater flamingos feed on small animals which live on the mud bottom, while the lesser flamingos feed near the surface on small plants. Each species has adapted to the environment in a way to minimize competition and maximize efficiency. The greater flamingo is a carnivore and the lesser a herbivore. In order to study these remarkable ecological systems, I took my family to East Africa for 5 years. This vehicle was our home, and we frequently went on safari to study animals more closely. In our early expeditions around East Africa, we were soon impressed with the numbers of exotic forms. Hartebeest, vulturine guinea fowl, and the brightly colored male agomid lizards. Time and again, we stop and marvel at these remarkable specializations in body form, each somehow helping the animal to live more successfully. In particular, the vast herds of game draw our attention. How do 30 kinds of hooved animals live together in harmony? Like the two flamingos, in many ways. For example, plains animals cannot hide from predators and generally have large herds. On the other hand, the forest animals, like the bushbuck, move by stealth in small herds. A simple but basic behavioral difference. It would be harder for a predator to find a member of a small, quiet herd in the forest than one in a large herd. On the other hand, a plains animal might be more secure among a large, noisy herd. The wildebeest, living in very short grass areas, has no cover when giving birth, and therefore does so very quickly. Within half an hour, the baby can keep up with its mother. But these hartebeest live in longer grass. The birth is slower, and the mother leaves the young hiding in the grass. As in many species, the hartebeest leaves the herd to give birth, lying down to be inconspicuous. The predator is never far away, and as it has always been, death is part of the life cycle, as this roller demonstrates. Minutes after being born, the baby raises its head. The mother licks the baby. By licking off and swallowing the afterbirth, the mother stimulates the production of her milk and removes clues of the baby's birth that would attract a predator. Time is of the essence. The baby rapidly gains coordination as it dries out. Soon it is time for a meal. The baby now begins a life which will probably end in sudden death. For the next few weeks, until it is strong enough to keep up with the herd, the mother leaves the baby to its own fate, returning every few hours to feed it. It is a most impressive sight to see many species of herbivores feeding together. We wondered whether they, like the flamingos, are feeding in a different manner. Our studies have shown that zebras eat mostly coarse grass. Their teeth and digestive tract are adapted for dealing with coarse food. In contrast to the zebra, the Cox's hartebeest feeds generally on the more succulent parts of the grass and on the more succulent species, while the Thompson gazelles favor the shortest grasses. As the mother warthog feeds on the grass, the babies feed on mother. Warthogs prefer the shortest of grass, as well as occasionally rooting in the soft soil with their shovel-like nose. but their speciality is getting down on their wrists to feed off the shortest grass. Such adaptations allow the great density of big game, since each is so highly efficient at converting grass into protein. While all the previous animals generally graze grass, the Grant's gazelle spends much of its time browsing bushes. The dik-dik is one of the smallest browsers. It can reach branches only about 2 feet high when searching for its food. Looking at the dik-dik, it's hard to believe it belongs to the same family as the cow. The gerenuk's long neck gives it a useful browsing advantage when food is scarce. The gerenuk even stands on its hind feet in order to reach higher. Competition among the different species of browsing animals is minimized by feeding at different heights on the trees and bushes. Of course, one browser can reach way above the gerenuk's 6-foot height. An adult giraffe, by standing erect and extending its tongue, can reach up to 20 feet above the ground. During droughts in ancient times, shorter giraffe perished, leaving the taller to propagate, and so eventually giraffe became taller. Thorns presumably evolved to give the plant protection from the browsing animals. But at the same time, the giraffe evolved a tough mouth for dealing with the needle-sharp thorns. In nature, a balance is struck, and both survive. When we examine a whistling thorn bush closely, we wonder how anything can eat it. Not only is it armored with spines, but each gall is a colony of stinging ants. Some of the animals can go for long periods without drinking, like these Grant's gazelle, a great advantage in Africa's vast deserts. These eland are so well adapted that they probably never have to drink water in their entire lives. They obtain their moisture from succulent leaves and are specialized for retaining the moisture within themselves. Other species like the Cape buffalo and the hippo are never far from water. They are dependent on it for life. The hippo confines his grazing to within about 7 miles of his favorite water hole and prefers not to have to travel that far. Other species, like wildebeest and zebra, make vast migrations from their dry season water holes to their wet season dispersal areas. As the country dries out after the rainy season, the animals trek to the water holes where they remain until the rains return. And so each species of hoofed animal is specialized in its own way, adapting as an integrated part of a highly efficient, stable ecological system. How about the predators? Are they too specialized in their own way, like the flamingos and the hooved animals? Speaking in general terms, yes. Lions, being the biggest predator of all, kill the biggest prey, generally at dusk and on the plain. often after stalking their quarry for a considerable distance, followed by a very short chase. Leopard, being a smaller cat, kills smaller prey, generally at dusk in treed areas. Often they pounce from the tree itself. Cheetah are slightly smaller than a leopard, but are built more like a greyhound than a cat. They hunt on the open plains in the daytime, killing after a short stalk and generally a few hundred-yard chase. They specialize in killing gazelle. This mother begins the hunt with her young following at a discreet distance. The gazelles are alerted as the cheetah watches for any clue which might indicate a weaker animal. The gazelle bounces high in the air, getting a better view. Suddenly the cheetah picks its quarry and starts running, reaching a speed briefly of up to 70 miles an hour. Held by the throat, the cheetah carries the gazelle to the shade of a nearby bush. The three large cats, lion, leopards, and cheetah, generally kill by strangulation, and she holds on until the gazelle is unconscious. The young cheetah join the mother and will soon get down to business. She was lucky this time. More often than not, the gazelle would escape. After all, the gazelles are well adapted for watching and running too. There is a delicate balance between the predator and the prey population. After a hearty meal, there is mutual grooming in order to clean the blood off one another. There are many other predators in East Africa, cats and mongoose, such as this serval cat. The caracal is a relative of the lynx and bobcat. The bush cat is the ancestor of the domestic tabby cat. Each of these species, no doubt, is specialized in its own way. Then there are the dog-like predators, the Cape hunting dogs, hyenas, jackals, and foxes. The hunting dog is one of the most fascinating and, like the wolf, one of the most illogically persecuted of all animals. As the wolf, they hunt in packs, making up for their lack of size by numbers and teamwork. Unlike the cat, the chase may carry on for miles, thereby weeding out those weaker prey who have no stamina. These bedraggled hunting dogs look misleadingly harmless as they rest in the noonday heat. As dusk arrives, they will strike terror into the animals on the plains. By late afternoon, the dogs limber up by stretching and playing. There's little sign of game on the horizon. They have stayed well away. At dusk, they set off in single file on the hunt, finally coming to a herd of wildebeest containing many young. Soon pandemonium breaks loose as the dogs attempt to panic the herd and cut off a calf. After 10 minutes of hard running, and as the sun sets, calf is dragged to the ground. The dogs consume the calf within seconds, and soon will be looking for another, playing a grim but necessary part in keeping the wildebeest numbers in balance with their environment. Contrary to popular opinion, hyenas are not simply scavengers. Similar to the hunting dogs, hyenas join together in packs, using the awesome power of their jaws to pull down prey as large as fully grown zebras. Up to 50 in a pack may chase the prey doggedly for miles, making very short work of anything they catch. Of the two common jackals, the silver-backed, here competing with the vulture, generally live along the edge of the plains. The golden jackal favors the middle of the plains. Both scavenge and occasionally pull down a young gazelle. The tiny bat-eared fox lives chiefly off insects and mice. There are 7 kinds of vulture in East Africa, and as expected, each has its specialization, so that altogether they form a good garbage disposal and recycling service. Those with featherless heads are specialized to reach into the gory cavities. Those with massive beaks tear at the toughest skin. The smaller species keep their distance and watch for scraps. When the vultures are finished, there is very little left for the insects. The Egyptian vulture is a real specialist, since it is the only bird that uses a stone to smash open an ostrich egg. Until recently, the native peoples of East Africa were as well integrated into the total ecological system as the other kinds of life. The Maasai tribe solved the problem of how to keep meat in a hot climate by the simple means of living on the cattle's blood rather than killing the animal. A calf is caught and held while a Moran fires an arrow into the jugular vein. The blood is caught in a gourd until the calf has lost all the blood it can safely lose. Then the skin is pinched in order to stop the flow. This high-protein diet is probably one reason why the Maasai are exceptionally healthy. But most of these modern tribes have taken on white man's ways, using medicines to keep their stock alive in countless thousands, so that the environment is destroyed, and with it, their own future. After we had studied the adaptations and the delicate checks and balances which maintain the natural environment, it was very obvious to us that European culture had destroyed the balance between most tribes and their environment. The Kalahari Bushmen and the Ituri Pygmies attempt at great odds to live in the old way, but they are exceptional. Archaeologists in East Africa dramatically describe the evidence of many large animals which have gone extinct in the last few 100,000 years. Obviously, they did not adapt. As a solution to our dilemma, I am not suggesting that we should all live like pygmies or bushmen, but merely that our road to survival is to learn the ecological laws of adaptation and abide by them by living, like any other well-adapted species, in harmony with our environment.